Welcome to CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered Mideast talk radio. I'm your host, Dr. E.Faye Willams, and we've got an exciting program planned for you today. We're going to be talking with a couple of our friends who are currently in Amman, Jordan. We'll be talking with Ambassador David Newton and John Usher. Are you there, Ambassador Newton?
He's
Hello?
here.
John, are you there?
He's sharing the mic with me, so he's
wonderful.
here.
Well, you can speak for him in this instance. To those who are listening in, we want to tell you that Ambassador David Newton has served the U.S. for over 36 years in a foreign service career that included assignments as U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Yemen, and a 3-year secondment to the faculty of the National Defense University. From 1998 through 2004, he was the first director of the U.S.-funded Radio Free Iraq, based in Prague. And, of course, John Usher is from Nebraska and is the father of Natalie and Timothy Usher and has worked in many different industries. He has held executive or management positions at Varian Association, and he's consulted with IESC in Stamford, Connecticut. He's traveled in over 160 countries, and we're going to talk about the current trip they're on. Ambassador Newton, I take it that you're on first.
We're having, as you would imagine, quite an interesting trip. We arrived yesterday in Amman after an interesting couple of days. We were staying in Jerusalem, and we consulted with quite a few people on the West Bank and Ramallah, talked with a couple of people in the Knesset. A week ago, we didn't have much to report. Since then, we've also been in Gaza, which was a very interesting trip.
Okay, so, we're going to want you to tell us a little bit more about Gaza. First of all, how long have you been on this tour?
We've been on it, I believe, 10 days.
So I imagine you're sort of getting ready to come home by now.
This is our 5th stop, and we have 2 more stops in Damascus and in Beirut.
I know that we often have these trips for Council for the National Interest, and we have different things that we want to find out. What exactly do you hope to accomplish on this trip?
It's important, I think, for the Council and for the people who go on the trips to get up to date. You know just as well as I do how vibrant, how exciting, and sometimes frustrating this area is. People use the word critical freely, but this is a critical period. This, perhaps, is the last chance for negotiations to succeed.
Is John on? Can I talk with him for just a second, and then I'll come back to you, Ambassador. John, how are you?
Well, fine. It's been a very interesting trip. We've met some extremely interesting people from all factions of the equation, and we're getting a lot of interesting responses.
What do you hope to accomplish on this trip, and do you feel that you're succeeding at the moment?
We're here to collect information mainly and to find out whether Fatah or Hamas or the people in the Knesset, what their views are and what's going on and what they see the end game being. We've talked to a number of people. Their views are quite interesting.
I've been on some of these trips myself. As the ambassador said earlier, they can be exciting, but they can also be very frustrating. I know that it's difficult in terms of your body switching over to another time, perhaps sometimes getting around, sometimes having meetings that you really relied on canceled at the last minute. I know all of that can happen, but I hope you're having better luck. Gene, are you on the line?
He is having a bout of bronchitis.
Oh, I'm so
and
sorry.
So he's not able to talk right now.
While you're on the line, John, let me just ask, what meetings have you been involved in thus far?
So far, I've been involved in all of them. The ones that were a little surprising to me was the Knesset people we met, 2 different people. One was a very interesting meeting, and the other one, there's a little more tension in it. We found that the voices were raised a couple of times, but we left with a handshake and happy.
Since you left happy, did you want to tell us a little bit about what those challenges were?
The toughest area is the view of how good Israel has been to the Palestinians and how is an invalid image of what is going on in Gaza. We were told they weren't occupying Gaza because there wasn't one single soldier, Israeli soldier in Gaza. But, of course, our view was, well, if you control the borders and boats can't come in and out, and the Palestinians can't leave Gaza, as I'm sure you're aware, Israel strafed Gaza the day before yesterday. If you have airplanes coming over and shooting rockets and bullets at Gaza for no reason, then that sounds more like an occupation.
Sounds like an occupation to me. I guess the closest situation I can think of is when my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were in slavery. They couldn't leave. They had no self-determination. That, to me, sounds a little bit like that. The other situation, it sort of sounds like South Africa. Would you agree? Some years ago. And I suppose this was an Israeli leader. Were you able to convince them that perhaps they want to rethink that?
No, we weren't able to. It was kind of sad, the argument they used that was totally invalid, but in their mind it was valid. We don't know with that particular individual where they're going, but we did meet with others that were more practical, let's say.
Let me see if we can talk for a moment with Ambassador Newton.
Yes, I'm back.
You had started telling us about the people with whom you had spoken. What's left on your trip? Who is it you expect to meet with over the next few days?
We have 2 more stops, one in Damascus and one in Beirut. We're still working on the schedule for those 2 places, but I hope certainly in Damascus we'll talk with government officials there and we'll see what else develops. In Beirut, government officials, and I hope, as usually is the case, we'll have a chance to talk to Hezbollah.
I've always wanted to go to Damascus. I've been to many of the other places that you've traveled, but haven't made it to Damascus yet.
You've missed something. It's a lovely city.
I know. I want to go on one of these trips with Eugene. I know he always plans very exciting trips. I'm looking forward to going to one of these days before long. Let's go back to Gaza, to the West Bank. How long were you in Gaza?
We were 2 days in Gaza, and we had a day and a half in Jerusalem, and we spent a full day in the West Bank in Ramallah.
Did you speak with any leaders in Gaza? And if so, do you have anything promising that you could tell us about?
We talked with a lot of people in Gaza. Of course, we needed naturally to talk to Hamas. We met with Ibrahim Haniyeh, who Hamas calls their prime minister in Gaza. We met with a number of other Gaza officials. We talked to UN people. We talked to businessmen. We talked to students. We tried to talk as widely as we could. It's an interesting place. I had never been to Gaza. One thing I think surprised all of us is a more surface appearance of normality.
Welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered Mideast talk radio. Again, I'm your host, Dr. E.Faye Willams, and we're talking with Ambassador David Newton and John Usher. And before we go back to them, I want to say that you can find out more about CNI at our website, www.cnionline.org, or on our blog, Fair Policy, Fair Discussion. We were talking with Ambassador David Newton about their visit to Gaza. I want to go back to you, Ambassador, now and complete your thoughts on Gaza.
Yes, what I said was, of course, this surface impression of some normality. This comes about because of the tunnel economy. There are, we are told now, 130 tunnels connecting Gaza to Egypt. We think of a tunnel as something that you dig straight down. The newer of the tunnels, 40 of them, are much larger and have ramps and can actually drive vehicles through them and bring in all kinds of supplies. So now you see more vehicles in Gaza. This is benefiting a kind of tunnel mafia, if you will. 80% of the Gazans statistically live on $1 a day or less. There are more products in the markets, but they can't buy them. And, of course, there's a serious problem with malnutrition, especially for children. Ironically, UNRWA, which does, I think, a wonderful job trying to help for half the population, it wants to build 600 housing units. It cannot because it legally cannot bring in building material. But the Hamas regime brings in building material through the tunnels and is building perhaps 1,000 apartments. People are under terrible psychological pressure. They don't know when there'll be a raid, but they know that they can't leave. They're blockaded, land, sea, and air. People are beginning to lose hope. There are social problems developing. We were told by an Israeli that they consider Gaza a success for their containment policy. But I said this does not take into account the the social changes, the bad social changes that are happening, the economic changes. These actions only in the end create more hatred of Israel by Palestinians. And this doesn't bode well for the future because Israelis at some point are going to have to live with Palestinians. In about 10 days, we'll be marking, certainly not celebrating, but marking the 43rd year of military occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. This can't, in my view, go on forever. How can it? How is Israel going to live with people if it is breeding hatred by its actions?
You're absolutely right about that. I have had the opportunity to visit Gaza, and I'm sure with all of the things that have gone on in the years since I've been there, the situation must be even worse. I want to speak with John and ask his impressions about meeting people on the street in Gaza. John, are you on the line?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about people on the street. I know that you've met with a lot of government officials, people in important positions, but do you also have an opportunity to speak with people on the street in places like Gaza?
Yes, did. Their view is that they can't understand how the United States can fund all of this because they're convinced Israel wouldn't be able to do many of the things that they're doing in the States funding it. They say the Americans are very nice, but the policies of the United States are the same policies that Israel has, and they're very confused about that. Today we talked with some people. They're saying that if the United States didn't fund Israel, that Israel would be more likely to come to the table and negotiate something that was fair to both Palestinians and the Israelis.
It's my understanding from previous visits is that many Israelis feel, just as the people on the street that you're talking about, they feel that all of the support that the United States give to Israel has challenges for its own economy and for ever arriving at peace. Did you find that to be true when you spoke with Israelis?
Some of the Israelis are actually the way we think. But in general, I don't think they understand that their standard of living would drop significantly if it wasn't for the United States subsidizing their living. Many of them would like to do what's fair, but in the back of their mind, they're also thinking that this land belongs to them. They don't understand that these people that they're pushing out have lived here for many years, which is many, many generations. Israel is still taking land away from people who have been on it. Their families have been on it for 500 years.
Did you find that Israelis readily engage in conversation when you ask them questions, or does it sound like, maybe they're getting a line that most of them keep to that line? We always hear about, the terrorists. It seems to make Israel the good guys in this situation. Did you hear much of that? Did you feel Israelis were freer to talk than many people are in the United States? Because, I know the challenges of even discussing this issue in the United States, but is it the same in Israel? Is it difficult for people to talk about it?
We didn't talk to enough people directly about that. What we did find out that was surprising is Israelis are not allowed to go to the West Bank, to Ramallah and things like that. It was kind of surprising. You see an awful lot of Israeli cars, of course, in Jerusalem, whether it's West Jerusalem, but very few do you see in the West Bank.
What about work? What are people in Gaza doing for work? I know that many have worked within Israel, but is that true now?
No, there's very little work. Matter of fact, I would guess that all of the checkpoints are 99% closed. We went to a business industrial park where Israel had agreed material to be manufactured, which would be returned to Israel and go out to the rest of the world, and that is not happening. Israel has reneged on the agreement. The only thing that I'm aware of that is being shipped out of Gaza now in any bulk are carnets. And some of those, they've been holding them at the border so long that they start to. And so, although Israel then turns around and ships them to Europe, they become a non-product by the time they arrive. they canceled because they were moved so slowly. The prospect of a job in Gaza is very slim now. The only jobs, I think, that are obvious are jobs that are done with the tunnel supplies, whether that's building material, like that.
It must be a very, very challenging way to live, to want to work and not be able to. And this is just for basic things like to feed yourself, to feed your family. What about hospital situation? If someone were ill in Gaza, do you have sufficient hospital or medical care there?
No, they don't. There's been a number of Gazans that talked to us about the fact about how many women and babies have died because they were having a problem. They needed to be moved to hospital in the West Bank or in Israel, and they wouldn't let them through. There's very little traffic in between Gaza and Israel, and there's almost none in between Gaza and Egypt.
Welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling. This show is a project of the Council for the National Interest Foundation, which works for fair U.S. policies in the Middle East and fair discussion of those policies here in America. You heard earlier President Eugene, who happens to be on this trip to the Middle East, with Ambassador David Newton and John Usher, who are on the line with us. We want to go to our line, to our callers. We have David from West Virginia.
Yes, ma'am. Your guests were talking a few minutes ago about the Palestinian perception that Israel wouldn't be able to do what it was doing without American support. My question is there anyone with CNI or any other organization trying to change United States policies, and if so, how are those efforts going?
This trip, for one, is a part of our effort to get information out, because, as you know, mainstream media will not give you the kind of information we're getting from Ambassador David Newton and John Usher, as well as our president, Gene Byrd. Ambassador Newton, did you want to make a statement about that, too?
Yes, this has to be a joint effort by quite a few organizations. We now an Israel, a Jewish lobby in the United States, J Street, which is a moderate organization and is trying to work for a more reasonable policy. There are many organizations. You cannot change it until you change public opinion and the fear and reluctance of many people, of the news media and in Congress, to even engage on these issues for fear of retribution. It's a long, difficult process. I do see anecdotal evidence and other evidence that the American people are beginning to understand that there are two sides to this story, and that the Palestinian people are suffering unjustly, and that our policy is helping that in bringing about that suffering.
And I think with people like you going there, giving the other side of the story, we move closer to that. As you said, many members of Congress are seemingly afraid to speak the truth about what many of them know is happening in the Middle East, and they're just afraid to support a balanced Middle East policy. And whenever candidates call for a balanced Middle East policy, it seems that there's this great effort to defeat them, because there's so many who know the truth, but they don't want others to know that truth. So many of our members of Congress just kind of live knowing that there is no fair Middle East policy when it comes to what the U.S. does. And even though our president started out seemingly wanting to really work on the peace process, we know that Congress is there generally to block whatever any president or any Secretary of State wants to do to balance that policy. I want to go to Lori in Massachusetts for a moment.
I tuned in a couple of minutes late. What I need to know before I ask my questions is, have our ambassadors seen Mr. Haniyeh already, or are they going to?
We have already seen Ibrahim Haniyeh in Gaza.
Oh, dear. Okay, well, I don't know. These questions have come lately. I've always wanted to go on one of those trips with you. I'm a member of CNI. But I would ask Mr. Haniyeh, in view of people here who are working very hard to educate Americans about what's going on there, what Hamas does makes some things it does makes it very difficult for us. Did you ask him if he can control the Qassams into Israel? Can he stop that?
You make a very good point, and you're quite right. We raised with him. He didn't really give us it was somewhat elliptical answer, but he said that they were almost stopped, and he thought if there was a lifting of the siege that there wouldn't be any problem. To check what actually happened, they had stopped. I pointed out to one member that there's no benefit to firing these crude rockets. It does them nothing but harm, and I suspect they realize that. But obviously there are significant problems in the Hamas position. I don't believe, like the last administration, that we should ignore people who are significant just because we don't agree with them or because they're doing things which are clearly wrong.
Ambassador, while we're on that subject, I read the other day that it seems there were some nonviolent actions going on, sort of like in the civil rights movement among the Palestinians. Did you see any evidence of that?
Yes, we talked to people, and there are two aspects. We talked to a number of people who are in the Belaine village, is a village which is resisting the confiscation of its lands. And there's now a kind of informal coordination of a number of villages. They describe their nonviolent efforts, which I'm sorry to say, on some occasions have been nonviolent only on the Palestinian side. One of them described the fact that the young man standing next to him was hit point blank with a heavy metal tear gas canister, which made a 4-inch hole in his chest, and he died on the spot. He was, he said, shouting at the Israelis, but because one of the international observers had also been wounded. They have lost 27 people killed in these demonstrations, many jailed. But they're determined, they're very brave people, and the Israelis admit they're having their impact is quite interesting, and that is the boycott, divestiture, sanctions movement, which is based on the efforts earlier against South Africa. The boycott has had quite an effect on the Israeli settlements because the Palestinians are refusing to buy elements. They've had a victory in Europe in the European Court of Justice because the leading Israeli exporter of food was labeling every from Israel, although much of it was from the settlements. And the European Court has found against them they cannot bring things in from the settlements under the free trade agreement, and they cannot label them Israel. So it's having an effect on states at universities, and these people also feel that now the Israelis are taking this threat seriously. The Israelis are saying, why are you doing this when we'd like to be nice to you? They're not very nice, of course. Yeah. And the Palestinians are really buying into various forms of nonviolence.
That sounds good. I think there will be more support around the world for that, or at least I pray that there will be. We want to go to Mariah from Eugene.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to ask CNI's delegation if they would have a chance to attend the second Haifa conference for the return of Palestinian refugees and for the democratic secular state in historic Palestine. This will be held in Haifa at the Al-Midan Theater, May 28th through the 30th. And I also wanted to ask your delegation if they have had a chance to talk with people in Gaza and the West Bank and Israel who do advocate for the one democratic state solution. I mentioned Haider Eid in Gaza, Mazen Kemseya in the West Bank, Eitan Bronstein of Zokraт in Israel.
Okay, and Mariah, we're coming up to a break, so let's see if Ambassador or John can respond to that quickly.
David, let me respond. First of all, unfortunately, we'll be traveling to Damascus and Beirut during that period, so we wouldn't be attending. Our full day in Ramallah, we had 8 separate appointments of all kinds of people. We didn't talk with any specific head of the one state. We talked with Hanan Ashrawi, for example. We talked with someone from Fatah. We talked with businessmen, academics. So varying views. But by far the greater view is still the hope to get a 2-state, because a 1-state might eventually become democratic, but it would be a long and painful process. And my own personal view is that Israel is beginning to recognize if they don't have a 2-state solution, that their future may be in doubt. There is certainly one current for the 1-state, but the great majority is still on the 2-state track.
Thank you so much for staying with us on CNI Jerusalem Calling. We promised to go back to Lori when we came back. Go right ahead with your question, Lori.
My question is, troops under Colonel Dayton, trained under Fatah, are arresting Hamas people in the West Bank. So then Hamas arrests political prisoners of Fatah in Gaza. And these arrests of political prisoners is so childish and undemocratic, and it's very hard for us to complain about Israel arresting peaceful protesters when Hamas and Fatah are arresting political prisoners as well. My question is, did you ask them, challenge them on this?
This is David Newton. Yeah, we did in general raise this subject and point out that the split between the two, in our view, didn't serve the Palestinian interest at all. From both sides we heard, we very much regret this split and we would like to get together again and we would like to reconcile. That, of course, it's easy to talk the talk, but they need to do a lot more to walk the walk because, as you say, they are arresting each other. The Fatah in the Gaza Strip are still being paid their salaries from Ramallah, and they're just sitting at home. I don't think there are too many arrests going on right now. This is far from a democracy on the Palestinian side, and there are these violations to speak of, and I think both sides recognize that reconciliation is important for them, but there are issues like who's in control and egos and various things that make it easy. The Egyptians are trying to achieve a reconciliation. I believe there are other countries involved. We're told they're fairly close in these issues. We'll have to see if they can manage to do it.
The peace process, what's the general attitude? We know the people in Palestine and in Israel have had ups and downs. They've had hopes and hopelessness. What's the general attitude now about the possibilities?
One very common phrase you hear everywhere from the Palestinians is, in a sense, is that well-known phrase, never again, that they are not going to, again after this to go kind of peace talks. This is the last time they're going to accept that. No more talks for talk's sake, and they expect real progress, not confidence-building measures, not lifting a roadblock here and there. They're determined. However, there is a bit of optimism on both sides. There's also skepticism. I said to the press that anyone could understand why people are skeptical about talks, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't give Senator Mitchell optimism on both sides from the about the indirect talks, and you could hardly find a more skilled or respected negotiator than Senator Mitchell. So there was a bit of optimism on that, but we also find people saying here in Amman, this can't go on just one negotiation after another for the sake of talking. There'll have to be something different in the future if this doesn't work.
The meeting with Mr. Netanyahu and President Obama on Tuesday, what do you think will come of this meeting?
It's hard to see. I think it suggests that maybe the United States is having some effect, and it suggests that the president is serious, that he's stepping up the pressure, stepping up the ante. One of the very, comment we got in Israel was nobody really knows who Mr. Netanyahu really is. He's a bit of a chameleon. People are even on the moderate side. They see some hopeful signs from him that he may really be committed to peace. Nobody is sure exactly who he is, what he really has in mind, what he really intends to do, and if he's really sincere about anything that he says. He really is a mystery to a lot of people. And he's a mystery, I think, to the Palestinians. They, of course, are much more skeptical about him. We'll have to see. I mean, when you bring him to the United States, and I guess President Abbas will be coming too at some point, you must have some reason to expect something, because if he comes and there's nothing happens, that will disappoint people and create gloom about the peace process. So there must be some hope in Washington to show some benefit from this visit.
Now, do you think President Obama can move closer to achieving peace in the region by working more closely with the Egyptians?
Well, I think they always do work closely with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians, as I say, have been trying to moderate between Hamas and Fatah. Egypt has one particular worry they express quite strongly, and that is Israel is trying to solve the problem of the Gaza Strip by dumping it back on Egypt. As you may remember, the Gaza Strip was under Egyptian military occupation until 1967. The Egyptians are adamant they are not accepting it back, and that's why they have not opened, although the tunnels are going ahead full speed. They are not going to do the Israelis a favor by opening the border, because they are convinced that the Israelis would push back Gaza on Egypt. The Gazans do not want that either. They're Palestinians, and they want to be united with their Palestinian brethren in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem.
What's the overall attitude toward Americans in the region? I mean, Americans, just like you or me, do both sides value assistance in the peace process? Or I should say maybe all sides, since there's more than one side.
Well, a question on the Israeli side, I mean, those people who don't really want to see a resolution, they would just like to go ahead with settlements. I'm sure they don't like to see the American. The view is settling in, even among Israeli politicians, that they have to have a two-state solution and that there will be a territorial price for the two solution. That is effective, and the Palestinians certainly want two often states step up the pressure and then back away when the blowback becomes too strong.
Okay, and we're going to quickly get Jamil in Maryland, and we may or may not have time for response. Go right ahead, Jamil.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, I have a quick question. How could it be possible that no one understands or figures out Benjamin Netanyahu? After all, he's been in government for, 30-some years. He served in the United States. We already know that he's adamant about not having peace or a two-state issue with the Palestinians.
This is David still on.
Okay.
Well, we do hear that, you may well be right, and there's certainly people who have that, but there are other people who listen to encouraging things he says. Now that you may dismiss what he says as just political talk, but there is a lot of uncertainty, and maybe he wants peace in theory, but when he looks at the difficulties, he may shy away.
And that's about all the time we're going to have now, John. I am so sorry, but I want to thank John Usher and Ambassador David Newton, who've been talking with us from their current trip to the Middle East. They're in Amman, Jordan, and they've been talking with us from there. They're in Amman, Jordan, and they've been talking with us from there. They're in Amman, Jordan, and